Hello and welcome to Becky's Bible Thoughts. I'm coming to you from Kampala in Uganda today to share a few musings with you from the Bible. It's always interesting reading through the Bible chronologically in the order that the events contained within it happened, rather than the order that they appear on the pages. It can get a little bit repetitive in places when the books of Samuel and Chronicles and Kings and occasionally some of the prophets repeat little bits of the same story. And I actually had a bit of a sense of deja vu a few days ago as I read through 1 Chronicles chapter 10 and then immediately after read through 1 Samuel chapter 31, which are almost identical. They contain very similar accounts of the death of the king of Israel, Saul, at the hands of the Philistines. Now, it's a good idea to read the different accounts of the same event that you find in the Bible. No doubt they drew on each other a little bit for some of the information, but occasionally there are extra little nuggets in one account that might not be found in the other. In this case, I spotted a couple of small verses right at the end of 1 Chronicles chapter 10, verses 13 and 14, which aren't found in the Samuel account of the same story. They read like this. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. It's a sad little section that wraps up the life of Saul, a man chosen by God himself to be the first king to lead the people of Israel. Saul started out in his career as king pretty well. When we read the early accounts of his life, he tends to follow God's instructions to the letter. But it didn't take too long until he started taking a few liberties. We hear of him making a sacrifice to God, which was not his responsibility or his place to do. We hear about an incredible defeat of his enemies, and then his disobedience of God's very, very specific instructions regarding what should happen to the plunder after the battle. It was actually after that fight that God himself spoke to Samuel, saying this in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 11. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. What a sad moment to know that Saul's actions caused God to regret his decision in making that man king. But simultaneously, I thought how incredible it is to know that God himself is so invested in the lives of us humans that our actions could cause that kind of a reaction. God is a part of our lives, and our actions, the things that we do, affect him. That is huge. But that's a tangent. Thankfully, because of the wonderful mercy and grace of God in sending Jesus to die for us, we know that we will never be cast aside by God. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. But it's still a good idea to look at the example that Saul set to see what lessons we can learn. We can identify those things that caused Saul to be separated from God and that led to his eventual death, so that we can act differently and live our lives well. That passage that we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 10 points out 3 specific reasons for Saul's rather sad end. Firstly, it says that he was unfaithful. Compared to some of the kings that would come after Saul, he didn't do anything altogether horrendous. But I think the key is seen in that moment where God regretted making him king. He has turned away from me. God said of Saul. Instead of faithfully following the God who had given Saul everything that he had, Saul started to be more concerned with himself. If we're going to live our lives well, the first priority needs to be putting God at the center of absolutely everything that we do, rather than ourselves. So firstly, he was unfaithful. Secondly, he failed to obey God's commands. Jesus himself said that anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. That's found in John chapter 14, verse 23. Obedience is something that's really important to God. There are numerous occasions where Saul directly disobeyed a command from God, and it cost him dearly. It's a good reminder to us to make sure that we're not neglecting anything that he has asked us to do. And thirdly and finally, Saul consulted a medium for direction. Now, we may not be going out and seeking guidance from fortune tellers today, but how often do we rely on external sources for direction rather than God? The opinions of others, the way our cultures dictate that we should live, or just choosing the easier road. Is the Lord the first place that we go to when we need guidance? He should be. It is so wonderful that we don't need to worry about God leaving us if we make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But if we want to live our very best lives right now, then we need to remember these lessons from the life of Saul and seek to follow after God faithfully and obediently, putting him first and coming to him when we need direction. It is a wonderful life lived with God. And we can remember those lessons so that we don't forget the importance of making him the absolute first and most important thing in our everyday lives. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this has been an encouragement and a challenge to you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.